Something I've noticed is that we don't really talk about politics in spiritual work. And I think that that's kind of an issue. I think that a lot of spiritual teachers, a lot of spiritual teachings, practices, and communities don't engage in the political. And I think that kind of leaves us at a loss when it comes time for, when a major election is coming up, like it is in the US right now, or when a major war is happening, like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that is deeply complicated and deeply painful to everyone on all sides of it. How do we respond from a place that is wise, a place that is connected to love and also deeper intelligence? How do we do that in a way that doesn't get sucked in to the political dynamic and the political polarization and doesn't play into that? I feel like for many years for myself, I didn't know how to do this. I didn't know how to engage in this kind of discussion and this kind of topic. And I think we need to start figuring out how, difficult as it might be. And recently for me, the way that I've found into this topic, and what I want to have the focus of this video be, is recognizing that politics externally in the outside world is really the same kind of thing as politics in the internal world. And I want to tell you a little bit more about what that means and also what that implies about how we can approach external politics. So what I mean by politics externally is the same as politics internally, is that we see the same kind of polarization that we see in the external political landscape in an individual's psyche. So when I work with people one-on-one, oftentimes what I will see is a polarization in their thinking or their beliefs or their behavior. A very common one is the head and the heart polarity. Do you follow the thinking, logical mind, or do you follow the feeling and emotive heart? And of course, this is a kind of a simple but a common example. There are many, many others. There can be polarization around money and spending. Do you invest and spend things liberally and freely and generously, or do you go a more conservative route and preserve money and play it safe? Do you kind of, you can go on and on with different kinds of polarities that a person might experience. Socializing and going out versus being at home and being with yourself. All of these different things. And the reasons that I'm bringing this up is that the same kind of dynamic of two truths, two sides that both have a perspective that is valuable, they create this kind of polarity that attempts to balance the discussion. The polarity attempts to balance the whole, kind of seesaw. But the problem is, the further one side goes out, towards its truth, the further the other side has to go out in order to try and balance. And what we end up seeing is a kind of, ideological arms race. One idea, which is valid, moving further and further this way. And because that is happening, the other idea feels like it has to move further and further the other way to balance out this dynamic. And you get these two sides that are extremes, really intense extremes. When you look at them in isolation, they're kind of absurd on their own. But when you look at them in the system and realizing that they're responding, they're both reacting to the other in an attempt to balance, in an attempt to create harmony in the system, you can understand how we got here. And the issue is that each side, and as I'm speaking both about what happens internally inside an individual psyche, but also, obviously, this is what happens externally in large groups of people. Each side in this polarization is responding to some pain, is responding to some fear or threat or danger that they rightfully perceive. There is something that there's a reason why each side kind of exists, and there's a reason why we have a logical brain. There's a reason why we have an emotive kind of heart, so to speak, and we need both of them. If we just kind of loved and were open and didn't think about the dangers of embracing life without any kind of discernment, then we wouldn't survive for very long. On the other hand, if we only are discerning, if we're only about the rational, intellectual part of life, then we have we lose touch. We become robotic, and we end up cut off from the very meaning of what it means to be human. And it's like this with every single polarity. There's truth and value on both sides of it, but the polarity has become so extreme, usually, especially in dysfunctional polarities, that neither side can hear the other. Neither side can see the value the other is bringing. And the only thing that they can see is the danger that the other side supposedly poses. Where does spirituality come into all this? Spirituality comes into this because specifically, and especially in the non-dual realm of spirituality, this whole dynamic that we're talking about is the very thing that non-dual spirituality is attempting to undo. And this is, in fact, also what any good healer or therapist or coach, for that matter, is trying to undo inside an individual. They're trying to undo this polarity, where this false dichotomy that has kind of arisen and is perpetuating itself, this kind of back and forth seesaw action, is dispelled. And it's dispelled not by cutting off one or the other of the sides and only having one of them rule. That would be dysfunctional in a kind of totalitarian sort of way. And we see that in kind of suppression, where one side kind of gets the upper hand, the other side is suppressed and goes into the shadows, and really just becomes a kind of... It comes out sideways, or it blows up in unexpected ways. Whatever part of us, whatever feelings we say are not okay, whether it's anger or shame or joy or happiness sometimes, whatever is cut off and suppressed is still a part of us. It's still part of the whole and will eventually try and burst out. And this is also what we see in political systems, any kind of totalitarian regime that suppresses the opposition, that makes itself the only truth, the only power that is, able to exist in a political landscape. The opposition suddenly becomes a suppressed, essentially shadow or unconscious part of the political dynamic, and it erupts, it blows up. The rebellions, and kind of resistance emerges. And so the totalitarian kind of regime and setup, it is never stable. It is stable it only looks stable, but really it is built on a lie. It is built on a deep suppression of half of the truth. So how do we bring healing to a system, whether it's a human being or a political system? It's really the same. We do it in the same way. There's nothing different about it. These systems of political, national kind of coexistence is the same as interpersonal, is the same as intrapersonal inside of an individual. And how we bring that healing into being is we need to basically take a step back and disentangle ourselves from the polarity. We cannot be in favor of one side or the other. We have to step back and see the whole and see what is going on here. What are the pains that each side is responding to? Why are they taking the positions that they are? What is the value that each of them are bringing to the table? And also being able to see the good intention that each side of this polarity has for the whole, whether for it's the whole person, the community, or for a country. Each side of a polarity has a good intention in it. It could be brought to such an extreme that it ends up resorting to extreme measures to bring about its goodness, its positive intent. But ultimately, there is positive intent there. We need to be able to take enough of a step back to be able to see the whole picture, to be able to recognize it, and to be able to bring these two polar opposites, supposedly polar opposites, together so that they can hear one another, so that they can speak to one another and be mediated in such a way that each side not only understands the other, but understands what it's trying to do for the whole and the importance that the opposite side has for the functioning, the harmonious, balanced functioning of the whole system. When we do that, what can happen is these two sides stop being poles. They stop being opposites. They actually start to move closer to one another. And eventually they can start to integrate and merge. And what happens when this merger takes place is it's not a moderate perspective. It's not just compromises between the two. It's not some gray mush in the middle. It's actually as they move together, they move upwards. They move to a higher level of consciousness, a higher level of interdependence. And that brings the whole discussion, it brings it all to a higher level. And from, in what's called, sometimes in philosophy, it's called thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And this is kind of what spirituality is really trying to do in an individual and also in society, is trying to bring us to this quote unquote higher level. Not necessarily it's I don't want to say that this higher level is inherently kind of superior to the one below it. It's just another stage in a progression. And what is possible from that place is a greater wholeness, a greater health, both of the individual. If we're talking about working with somebody one-on-one, suddenly there's less internal friction. There's less, back and forth thinking and like contradictory actions, because each side is trying to win over the other. And in a political system, what happens is you have increased harmony as well. You have less energy spent on bickering and fighting against one another, and more energy spent on what needs to happen. A kind of right foot forward, left foot forward, right foot forward, left foot forward. You need both the right foot and the left foot in order for you to walk forward. Same thing in a political system. So spirituality, it really it's essentially a kind of healing. It is a kind of healing that refuses to buy into and believe in the reality of the dichotomy. It doesn't ignore the reality. We can't just say, oh, you both are ridiculous. You believe in illusions that you've created, which at the bottom is actually true, but you don't tell them that, because they won't like it. They will, both sides will turn against you. And in fact, Thich Nhat Hanh in Vietnam was exiled from his home country by both sides. Both the kind of pro-U.S. Catholic side of the country, the U.S. was supporting, as well as the communist side. Both of them exiled him. And it's because, bringing this kind of perspective can be a real threat to a polarity where each side is intending to dominate and to win over the other in a way that it becomes very threatening sometimes to bring a message of peace. It becomes very threatening, paradoxically, to talk about love and to even attempt to really embody love. So, to anybody doing this kind of work, you tread lightly, tread carefully, build trust within an individual system. If you're talking about two different parts of a person, mind, heart, or what have you. If you're talking to two people or two sides of a conflict, whether a war or a political impasse, you have to build trust. You have to gain their trust. You have to give them also hope that there is a solution, one that basically it's about letting people know that you can both have what you want. There is a way for both sides to get what they want. But it takes some doing. It takes some talking. It takes some negotiation. It takes some, more than negotiation, empathization. I just made that up. It takes empathy. It takes being able to hear one another's pain and one another's fear and hold space for that, as well as recognize and reckon with your own pain and your own fear. And hold space for that. Because if we can't do that, then we're missing what these debates and these wars and these conflicts are really about. We have to be able to attend to that. We have to be able to meet people where they're at, and acknowledge the reality and the justification that extremes take on, that really why they're taking it on. We have to really recognize it. And we cannot shame, we cannot blame, we cannot make wrong, as tempting as it is, because that will just bog down and destroy trust and destroy mutual understanding, and there will be no progress. I hope that this has been helpful. These are difficult conversations, and I've been talking about them mostly in the abstract for a reason. I think it's sometimes a little easier to approach these conversations, talking about them from a little bit of a distance. But I think what we need to have these conversations also at a little bit more specific, kind of close to the heart sort of way. We need to do it gently, with empathy, with care, with a lot of love, not just in words, but in action. And it's scary to do that, and it's risky. And that's what's needed. So I hope that this has been helpful. Please write some comments in the comment section. If you would like to connect more about this, I've got an email list that I'll link to below. And yeah, if you want to engage more in this kind of conversation, I've got a community that meets on Saturdays where we talk about this kind of stuff and more. So I hope you have a wonderful evening, and hope the election doesn't stir too many feathers. Much love.